Hello everybody and welcome back to Red Eagle Politics. Make sure you guys like this video down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. So in today's video, kind of wanted to touch base on the 2028 electoral map because 2024 was relatively easy for Republicans. You had 7 swing states, although there were a few states that actually ended up being closer than expected and closer than some of those original 7 swing states that we really touched base on. But for the Republicans, what they had to do and what was seen as their easiest path to victory was win the 2020 states, which included North Carolina for Trump, win Georgia, and then win Pennsylvania. And definitely those were the states that were called kind of basically in that order on election night, and we knew that Donald Trump was going to win sometime around midnight Eastern for sure, even though it was very clear that even at like 8 or 9 p.m. we knew that Donald Trump was going to be the favorite. But looking forward to 2028, given certain shifts we saw in 2024, what is the electoral map really going to look like? What is there to watch? And is it going to get easier for Republicans, assuming you have like a more neutral environment, or is it going to be, easier for Democrats once again? And was 2024 kind of like I guess you would say a more Republican favorable year given the time, and you're going to see a little bit of a shift left? How does the map really shake out? Is there even really the math for that? We'll look into it in this video, but I did want to fill out the map and kind of basically just fill it out in kind of a toss-up manner where we're going to have the Republican states, the Democrat states, and definitely the toss-up states, which can basically go either way. So without further ado, we're going to add the toss-up color right here, and then we're going to go. So obviously the Republican states that are going to go red by 10 points or more no matter what, you have your Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, the Dakotas, 4 out of the 5 electoral votes in the state of Nebraska. Kansas, I know a lot of people have said Kansas might get a little bit closer. Yeah, I'm not ready to go there yet. I don't think it's going to be under 10, although watch the Kansas City area, what it does in 2028 in terms of how it's going to shake out in the 2030s. But it's not a state that really is going to flip anytime soon. Obviously, much of the Deep South and the Appalachian states and Ohio and Iowa now have moved into this column. Missouri as well is in this column. Ohio used to be that swing state in the Rust Belt that you had to win as a Republican. Now it seems like that might be shifting to Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania wasn't really regarded to be all that competitive for Republicans in years past, kind of was like the white whale. So you have South Carolina, Florida, Texas, Alaska, could be a little bit under 10, but for right now, probably put that in the safe column. Same thing with Maine's 2nd District, the way it's moving. But, even if it is going to be under 10 points, it's still going to be just like a hair under 10. It will be safe. So already, this is the safe states that you have filled out here. A lot of people wouldn't have considered states like Texas, Florida, Ohio, and Iowa as like the safe states. The Republican floor, like ahead of 2020, was just 126. But right now, the way you're looking at it, it jumps up to almost 100 more than that at 219. And that's just the states you're going to win by 10 points or more, by the way. Now, the Democrats, they'll take the Western Seaboard. They'll take Hawaii. They'll take Colorado by 10 points or more. They'll take Delaware, Maryland, D.C., Massachusetts, Connecticut, Vermont, Maine's 1st District. All those states are going to be going 10 points or more. Rhode Island's a little bit iffy. It's kind of like the opposite of Kansas. Maybe you want to put that one in the safe column as well. New York and Illinois, I think you could make the case those would be a hair just under given certain trends and certain shifts that we're seeing. But still, nevertheless, I think you could say they're going to go in the likely Democrat column at a very minimum. Meanwhile, you could talk about a state like Arizona, which is also showing a drastic shift to the right, being in the likely Republican column. Nevada, maybe just a hair under in lean. And we could look at some of the registration data that backs this up. Republicans once again took the lead in the state of Nevada in the overall registration. There's still plenty of ancestral Democrats there, but you look at that shift of nearly 100,000 votes or voters, I guess you should say, to the right of where it stood at the end of the 2020 election cycle. So already you're talking about a state that's going to be very difficult for the Democrats to win. Similar thing in North Carolina, where, it's always been somewhat of a red state or a red-leaning state. But even at book closing in 2024, Democrats had a lead of 105.6K, and now the active party registration is Republican by 83,000 votes. So a massive shift to the right in North Carolina. Doesn't really seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. Maybe you could say it would be a close state again. I think it's going to remain a close state, but I think close state leaning more Republican than not is probably the way it stands right now. Now, definitely Minnesota, I think, stays in the Democrat column. Maybe a hair under 5. Virginia as well. I don't think those states are going to really be, on the move too much, assuming you have more of a neutral environment or whatever. Nebraska's 2nd district as well probably leans a little bit more Democrat. Maine, I think, is likely Democrat as well. And New Hampshire's kind of diverging from that. If you look at the New Hampshire data, Republicans were in the deficit in 2020 in registrations. Now they've got a commanding lead, and it's shown no signs of slowing down. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, this is going to be where it's won for sure. New Mexico, we'll see what happens with the Hispanic vote, but it's definitely a state that will remain in play. Georgia, it's seen a lot of leftward shift in the Atlanta suburbs, but still should be remotely competitive in 2028, even if it's going to be a state that votes a little bit to the left of the country instead of a state that votes a little bit to the right of the country. But the popular vote, it's there for sure, you could say, and you could make the case that you'd like to have it, but it doesn't really give Republicans this massive advantage given where they're kind of making these gains. They made massive gains in these deep blue and deep red states that are big, and obviously it's turned states like New York and Illinois from Democrat strongholds where you couldn't really do that well in, and now they're still, Democrat states, but they're not going to be voting D plus 23 or D plus 18. They're going to be voting like D plus 9. And that's a massive shift. And that carries over to the popular vote as well. You're seeing shifts all across California. And the Democrats really have not learned from their mistakes. They're not really making an effort to really reach out and appeal to a lot of these voters. They're just trying to make Donald Trump seem unpalatable. And that was always what they've been able to do. And when he has a record, if that record is viewed more positively, it's going to backfire even more. They're really going all in on Trump being a failure once again, and it's never really worked for them. Do you really think it's going to work now? That's why they're really banking on this whole trade strategy, just completely collapsing the economy in order to make Donald Trump look bad. That is really what their 2028 hopes hinge on. But even so, they're so unpalatable as a party that the election's probably going to end up being somewhat of a toss-up. And even states like New Jersey have shifted vastly to the right. Maybe you could say it's a little premature to put New Jersey as a toss-up state, and maybe it is. But when you look at the map like this, 252 to 217, Republicans used to have to win everything and then some in order to win the election. It was the case in 2016, arguably 2020. Now, 2024, there were enough toss-up states to the point where you could just say, Republicans have an easier path. They just need to win 3. Democrats need to win every state in the Rust Belt, and then they need to, obviously, I think that would have been technically enough, but then hold all their states, and they almost lost a state like New Hampshire. Nebraska's 2nd was closer than people thought it would be. But still, regardless, looking at the state of affairs in 3.5 years is a lot we don't know. But looking at the election map and what it likely will come down to is the fact that Republicans, once again, they need to win 1 state. Democrats need to win everything. Because you could look at this here. Give Republicans Pennsylvania. They're there. If you give them a combination of like Georgia and New Mexico, Georgia and New Hampshire, Georgia and Wisconsin, they would get there. But when it comes down to Pennsylvania, if you win Pennsylvania and the registration data is favoring Republicans there in almost every single drop we've seen, there's been a little bit of an exception the past couple of weeks because there's a primary going on in Philadelphia where you do have a lot of Republicans switching their registration. It's impacting the numbers, but the Democrats have only gained like 1,000 on net. Now, if that continues after that primary is over, yeah, we could talk about it being a problem. Maybe Democrats are doing something there that we need to counter. But regardless, the state is moving to the right significantly, which is a massive development for 2028 because it shows that what we saw in 2024, where Republicans completely surged in the registration. It was only the tip of the iceberg per se, and there's a lot more where that came from, and that's going to help out. And it wasn't just ancestral Democrats moving to the Republicans that have already been voting Republican. These are mainly new voters, younger voters as well, and just disaffected voters who haven't voted in a very long time re-entering the pool of voters. So that's all good news for Republicans, but regardless, Pennsylvania is going to likely do it. Technically, Democrats, even if you gave them New Mexico, you gave them Georgia, you gave them Wisconsin, you gave them Pennsylvania, and then you'd have New Hampshire. Maybe they could lose a state like a Michigan or a Georgia or a Wisconsin, but they could only really lose one of those states. But if they lose Pennsylvania, the whole thing is over. And that's what it comes down to, because it's unlikely, in my opinion, they're going to take North Carolina. You could make the case that, North Carolina still, if it's a really good year for them, is reachable. Yeah, maybe you could talk about Nevada. I think Arizona, given the registration data, including the most recent registration data that we've seen, is too far gone for them. But it's like, yeah, this election map that's upcoming, once again, is extremely difficult for the Democrats. Even if they have a good year, they are not guaranteed victory, and that's not a good thing, because they've just completely failed to relate to middle America. They failed on their messaging. They failed on literally everything. So Republicans out of the gate, you're talking about a electoral floor that is somewhere around 252, unless it's like a horrible year for them, which in that case, it would still be around like 230, 236. So that's the way it is, but not a very good, favorable map for Democrats. Once again, a relatively favorable map for Republicans, likely being J.D. Vance against one of these other clowns. And that's another thing, because, it's not just how strong the Republicans are that's really fueling this and how popular Trump and his movement are, but it's also the Democrats completely just don't have anybody that you could point to and say, wow, I'm terribly afraid of this candidate. I'm terribly afraid of this person. I'm not saying that that person can't exist. I'm not saying that they can't win, but definitely I would rather be the Republicans going into 2028 than the Democrats. That is completely unchanged from my stance 6 months ago. So anyways, guys, thanks for watching this video. Like this video down below, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications so you never miss another video. Follow me on social media. The links are all in the description down below, and I will see you guys in the next one. Red Eagle out.